Hey guys, tonight we step onto a frozen airfield in eastern England and slip into the first moments of flying a B-17 bomber over Germany, where the dawn smells like fuel and wet grass, and the sky feels as sharp as broken glass. Searchlights are off for now, but your nerves are fully powered. You hear four-engine giants waking up across the hardstands, a low, rolling thunder that vibrates in your ribs. This is the kind of morning where you can almost believe you are just going to work, right up until you see your bomber's shadow looming in the pre-dawn like a building that decided to grow wings. And yes, you probably won't survive this the way you imagine it in the movies, with perfect hair and a heroic soundtrack that knows when to swell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Invite your brain to stay present by dropping your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are up before the sun because the war runs on schedules. Breakfast is coffee, eggs, and the strange optimism of men who have already learned not to stare too long at the odds. You pull on layers that make you feel like a walking closet. Wool, sheepskin, gloves thick enough to wrestle a bear or at least a stubborn oxygen mask. If your unit is lucky, you have an electrically heated suit, which sounds luxurious until you realize it is a luxury designed to keep you from freezing into a polite statue at height. Outside, your B-17 waits with the patient bluntness of a machine built for long, ugly work. The flying fortress is famous for ruggedness and defensive gun positions, and a typical crew is about 10 men, each with a job that has to mesh perfectly when the world gets loud and cold. 4 engines hang under the wings, like promises you hope will keep their word. The bomb load depends on range and target, but right now you mostly feel the idea of weight rather than the exact number of pounds. The ground crew swarms with quiet competence. They check tires, fuel lines, and control surfaces. You watch them and try to borrow their calm. Your plane wears nose art, and that is your first quirky truth of the day. You can be part of a massive strategic system, yet you still need a painted mascot or a cheeky name to convince your brain this aluminum beast is somehow yours. Then comes the briefing room. The map rolls out. The route is a thin line that looks harmless until you remember what waits along it. Time over the coast, expected flak belts, enemy fighter concentrations. You listen, nod, and sip coffee that could probably remove rust if you left it on a spoon long enough. That is joke 1, light and necessary. Historians still argue whether the daylight strategic bombing campaign could ever have been as precise and war-shortening as its architects hoped, especially in the earlier years before improved escorts, navigation, and experience shifted the balance. You are not here to settle the argument. You are here to survive its footnotes. Back on the line, you climb aboard through the narrow belly of the airplane. Inside smells of oil, rubber, cold metal, and the faint bite of oxygen gear. The intercom crackles with voices checking in, pilot and co-pilot up front, navigator and bombardier in the glassy nose, engineer near the cockpit, radio operator midship. Gunners spread through waist, top, ball, and tail positions depending on your exact loadout and the period. The plane is a small city that has agreed to float. Maybe today, you are the navigator, the quiet mathematician of this airborne world, unfolding charts and thinking in headings and drift angles. Or you are the bombardier, already rehearsing the calm hands you will need later. Either way, you feel the peculiar mix of routine and awe. You have trained for this. You have also never truly felt it in your bones until this moment. Superstitions sneak in around the edges of professionalism. A waist gunner taps a rivet 3 times before every mission. A tail gunner wears the same scarf because the one time he didn't, he says, the flak came uncomfortably close. Someone has wedged a tiny stuffed animal by an ammo box. You tell yourself you are not that kind of person. Then you check your lucky coin anyway. In a war fought by machines, humans still try to negotiate with fate using pocket-sized offerings. The engines start in sequence. The sound is enormous and oddly comforting, like the world has decided to keep its heartbeat steady for a while. You run oxygen checks, radio checks, turret checks. The pilot reads the checklist in a voice that sounds like sleepwalking confidence. The engineer answers with numbers that make everything feel temporarily solvable. Joke 2 arrives when someone mutters that the B-17 is so tough it will probably fly home, even if you forget to bring yourselves along. The laugh is louder than it deserves. Joke 3 is the observation that you are essentially an airborne delivery service. Only your parcels are 2-ton opinions about German industry. Taxiing begins. Other fortresses creep forward, propellers carving pale discs in the cold dawn. You feel the bombs beneath your feet and the weight of 10 men pretending to be casual. The runway stretches ahead, long and straight and indifferent. Then the throttles advance. The plane surges, heavy at first, then smoother as speed builds. The tail lifts, the wheels chatter, and then, suddenly, do not. The moment of liftoff is less romance and more commitment. You climb into the thinning morning, watching England spread out in muted greens and greys. The Channel waits ahead like a cold border between the world you know and the world you only half believe you signed up for. For now, the engines hold steady, the crew voices stay calm, and you let yourself borrow a brief, fragile thought. Maybe the fortress, the formation, and the checklist will be enough to get you to the edge of Germany and back again. You are still climbing, still feeling the heavy steadiness of 4 engines pulling you into a brighter, colder morning when you realize something important. The airplane may be a fortress of aluminum and rivets, but the real architecture is human. 10 men, give or take, each wedged into a station that feels like its own tiny universe, have to become one mind that can survive high altitude, bad luck, and worse surprises. The first thing you notice is the way voices on the intercom change once the wheels are safely tucked away. The formal call-outs soften. The pilot's tone shifts from ceremonial to conversational. The co-pilot adds little confirmations that sound like friendly nudges. The engineer becomes the quiet guardian of numbers. The radio operator listens to the ether like a man eavesdropping on the gods. In the nose, navigator and bombardier speak in clipped phrases that pretend they are doing math, not managing dread. This is a mainstream truth about B-17 life that doesn't need exaggeration. The crew is a small, interdependent society, and your survival depends on how well people handle their individual jobs while trusting everyone else to handle theirs. The Flying Fortress is famous for ruggedness, but it is also famous for the way its crew structure turns chaos into something you can at least argue with. You start to map personalities the way you might map coastlines. The pilot is your anchor. Even if he is 22 and still looks like he should be asking permission to stay out past 10, he wears authority like a jacket that has been broken in by necessity. The co-pilot is the silent relief valve, ready to take the controls if fatigue or flak or fate yanks the pilot out of the story. The navigator is the scholar of the sky, counting wind, drift, and time like a librarian checking overdue books. The bombardier is precision with a heartbeat. The gunners are the blunt poetry of defense. The radio man is your thread to the world, and the engineer is the caretaker of the lungs and bones of this craft. The jokes begin early, because without them, you might start thinking too carefully. Someone says the crew is like a travelling band, where nobody asked to play the tuba, yet everyone still has to show up on time. That's joke 1, and it earns a soft laugh that floats through oxygen masks. Nicknames appear with the speed of self-defense. Professor for the navigator. Preacher for the guy who swears he will find God in the flak bursts. Hollywood for the bombardier who keeps polishing his goggles like the camera is always rolling. You may have joined as a rank and a last name, but you are quickly recast as a character in this airborne ensemble. If you are lucky, your nickname is affectionate. If you are very lucky, it is not anatomically specific. Ritual becomes the glue. Checklists are the official kind of ritual. Mechanical prayers recited the same way every time. Carb heat, mixtures, mags, props, oxygen on, interphone checked, guns tested. You hear the words in your sleep. The repetition steadies your hands because it suggests the universe is still obeying rules. Then there are the unofficial rituals that no one dares to write down. The way someone always eats the same thing before takeoff, as if the stomach is a bargaining chip. The way a gunner pats his turret housing like a faithful dog. The way you keep that lucky coin from Section 1 tucked into a pocket that is now strictly a matter of national security. A quirky tidbit floats through the intercom. Somebody claims a crew in another squadron once carried a small good luck charm that was so absurdly specific, so deeply ridiculous, that the entire ground crew started saluting it. You don't know if it is true. You don't care. You want it to be true because it suggests humor is still allowed inside the machine. Historians still argue whether these rituals and superstitions meaningfully improved performance or simply gave airmen a psychological handhold in a system that was statistically brutal. But up here, in a metal tube full of breath and noise, you feel the answer in your own pulse. If a silly ritual helps you tighten a strap properly, or keeps you from spiraling into worst-case visions, that ritual has earned its place. The crew's quiet fear lives just behind the jokes. You hear it in the way men ask questions that are really requests for reassurance. We're good on oxygen? You sure those mags sounded clean? How's that engine temp looking? No one says, are we the ones who don't come back? Because that question is too large to fit inside language. The social choreography is gentle but real. You learn who needs quiet and who needs noise. One gunner talks more when he's scared, another goes silent and becomes a statue with a heartbeat. The pilot uses humor like a tool. The navigator uses numbers like a shield. The bombardier stares forward with the kind of calm that might be confidence, or might be a very sophisticated form of denial. Joke 2 arrives when someone says the B-17 is a 10-man apartment, with terrible insulation and a very aggressive landlord. The landlord, of course, is the war. The laugh is brief, but it helps. You also notice the hierarchy softening into a kind of practical democracy. Rank matters, sure, but competence matters more. If the engineer says an engine is running hot, everyone listens. If the navigator says the winds have shifted, nobody argues with ego. You are all pieces of a single task, and the task does not care about pride. In moments of calm, the crew shares tiny details of home. A photo taped inside a jacket. A letter folded so many times it feels like cloth. Someone mentions a dog back in Ohio. Someone else swears that after the war he will never look at eggs again without feeling suspicious. That's joke 3, and it earns the warmest laugh so far. As the horizon sharpens and the world beneath you becomes a patchwork of fields and river bends, you understand the quiet logic of this brotherhood. You are not best friends in a romantic sense. You are something older and simpler. You are people who have agreed to keep each other alive through procedure, trust, and the occasional perfectly timed stupid joke. And that agreement, fragile as it feels, is the first real armor you carry. You file into the briefing hut with the rest of your crew, boots thudding on wooden boards that have heard the same nervous rhythm 1,000 times. The room is warm compared to the airfield, but it is the heat of proximity and purpose, not comfort. Men crowd benches, shoulders brushing, all of you wrapped in layers that smell of wool, oil, and last night's cigarette smoke. The lights hum overhead with the blunt brightness of a place that has no patience for romance. Coffee is passed down the row. It is the kind of brew that could probably strip paint off a Jeep, which is joke 1, and nobody even argues because everyone has tasted it. You swallow anyway. The caffeine is less a luxury and more a negotiation with your own eyelids. A curtain hides the main map. That curtain is a liar for about 30 seconds. You know the routine, and that routine is a mainstream historical fact in its own right. Crews in the U.S. Army Air Forces, especially in the 8th Air Force's daylight bombing campaign, attend pre-mission briefings that cover weather, route, target intelligence, expected flak, and fighter threats. The idea is to turn a terrifying unknown into a list you can check, even if the list is written in chalk and optimism. The operations officer speaks first, voice steady, finger-tapping times and assembly points. He talks about takeoff windows, rendezvous altitudes, and the order of groups. The words have the sound of normal work. Then the meteorologist steps up. He describes cloud layers, winds aloft, and visibility over the target with the calm of a man handing you a forecast for a picnic instead of a firefight. Your navigator leans in toward you and murmurs drift numbers under his breath. The bombardier adjusts his goggles, though he does not need them yet, as if the simplest physical ritual can anchor the mind. The gunners sit back with arms folded, pretending they are bored. Their boredom is theatrical. Then the intelligence officer takes over. He does not say good morning. He says the name of the enemy fighter units expected in the area, the types you might see, and the manner in which they have been attacking formations lately. He marks zones on a map where interception is likely, and points to thickly shaded regions that mean flak. The broad language is clinical, but your brain translates it into something more personal. This is the roulette part. You start doing private math. How far inland? How long you will be exposed? How thick the defense is? You look at the red route line, like it is a vein that has to carry you to a dangerous heart and back again. You are trying not to count odds, but your mind is already sneaking numbers into the margins. The target photos come out next. Grainy aerial images and diagrams that show rail yards, factories, power stations, or oil facilities. The targets of this war often look oddly tidy from above. like someone arranged them for a school project, which is joke 2. You are not bombing a model. You are bombing a real place built to feed a war machine that must be starved. Historians still argue whether early daylight bombing doctrine overestimated what precision sights and formation discipline could achieve under heavy opposition, especially before long-range fighter escort became consistently available. That debate is far above your oxygen mask. But it matters in the quiet way. Big ideas always matter to the people who have to execute them. The officer outlines alternate targets. If weather closes in or smoke obscures the aim point, you will shift to a secondary objective. That contingency planning is both reassuring and unsettling. A quirky tidbit slips into the room on a whisper from the row behind you. Someone says a veteran crew keeps a tiny toy roulette wheel in their flight bag. They spin it before every briefing and claim that if it lands on black, the flak will be light. The story is ridiculous. The story is also believable because humans are excellent at building small talismans against large randomness. You think of your lucky coin from the morning and decide not to judge anyone's methods. The intelligence officer mentions recent losses in passing. Not numbers, not a dramatic pause, just a sober acknowledgement that opposition has been heavy. The way he says it is almost gentle. The fear in the room is already self-sustaining. It does not need theatrical fuel. When questions are invited, most are technical. Radio frequencies, changes to assembly patterns, any reports of new gun emplacements near the target. One man asks about expected icing, another asks about diversion fields. These are practical questions asked by practical people, trying very hard to keep the universe in the realm of solvable problems. You do not ask your real question. Nobody does. The real question is too naked. Will this be the mission where the numbers finally pick you? The briefing ends with a reminder of discipline. Stay in formation, trust your box, follow the lead. The B-17's reputation for toughness and defensive firepower is invoked without bragging. You know the aircraft can absorb punishment that would shred lighter planes, and that formation gunnery creates overlapping fields of fire. But you also know that discourage is not the same as prevent. As the room breaks, someone cracks a final line, which is joke 3. He says the only thing scarier than the German flak map is the base's breakfast schedule. The laugh is weary but genuine. You stand, stretch stiff legs, and let the target name settle into your memory like a heavy coin of its own. The crowd funnels toward the door, and the warmth of shared air thins into the chill outside. You feel that shift from information to inevitability. The mission is no longer an abstract possibility. It is a route, a time, a place you must fly through. Your crew regroups in a loose cluster. The pilot gives a short nod. The navigator tucks his notes away carefully. You all start walking back toward the aircraft line, where your B-17 waits in the pale daylight, innocent and deadly, a machine that will soon turn the chalk lines you just studied into real sky. You touch the lucky coin in your pocket once, not because you believe it controls fate, but because it reminds you that you are still a person inside the math. You step back out into the half-light with the briefing still buzzing in your skull. The target name sits behind your eyes like a stamped passport you did not ask for. The airfield is awake in a quiet, mechanical way. Trucks creep between hard stands. Mechanics move with the brisk calm of people who know minutes matter. This is the pre-flight moment where the war stops being a map and becomes your aircraft. You walk toward your B-17 and force yourself to see it as it truly is. Not a legend, not a poster, just a complicated thing that has to behave exactly right over a country that will try very hard to make it stop. A mainstream historical fact you feel in your hands is that B-17 seconds demand thorough pre-flight checks. In cold, damp England, both ground crew and air crew inspect control surfaces, fuel and oil levels, hydraulics, oxygen equipment, radios, turrets, and the countless small parts that hold a 4-engine bomber together. The checklist is not a formality. It is a mechanical prayer you recite because you want to live long enough to be annoyed by breakfast again. You begin the walk around. Your boots crunch on gravel. The smell of fuel is sharp and clean, like a slap that wakes you up without apology. Oil has that thick metallic sweetness that clings to your gloves. The scent is information, and you want your senses tuned. You run a hand along the fuselage and feel rivets, seams, and patches from earlier missions. The metal is cold but straightforward. If something is loose or cracked, this is where you catch it before the sky tests it for you. The crew chief meets your eyes and gives you the quick report. One engine ran a little hot on yesterday's test. A line was replaced. The radio set was checked twice. His calm is the kind you trust because it has been earned. Joke one slips out when someone says he knows this plane so well, he probably argues with it in his sleep. The chief does not laugh, which somehow makes the joke land even better. You move to the wings. The scale still feels mildly ridiculous for a machine that will be pointed into flak. The wing is a long bridge of aluminum, and you check the control surfaces, the hinges, the edges. The B-17's reputation for ruggedness is real. But ruggedness is not magic. It is careful design, plus careful maintenance, plus crews who refuse to skip a step when their fingers want to hurry. The engines are your 4 promises. You inspect latches and oil levels. You watch a mechanic hand-turn a prop with the care of someone handling a sleeping animal. You know each engine is a complicated agreement between metal, fuel, and temperature. Nearby, armourers handle bombs with a calm that borders on intimate familiarity. The bomb load rests on carts like heavy punctuation. This is doctrine turned into weight. You catch yourself thinking about the journey those bombs already took from factory to rail to ship to base, just to wait here for you. Joke 2 surfaces quietly. You are the world's most anxious delivery service, and the return address is history. You check the nose glazing. The navigator and bombardier will live in that glass bubble where the view is gorgeous, and the vulnerability is impossible to ignore. You look for cracks, frost, and loose framing. Inside the aircraft, checks continue in clipped, familiar rhythm. The engineer works through electrical and fuel systems. The radio operator tests the set and confirms frequencies. The gunners check ammunition feeds and turret movement. A quirky tidbit floats through the crew as you squeeze along the narrow fuselage. Someone swears a veteran crew in another squadron painted tiny, almost invisible good luck marks inside their aircraft, private symbols no inspector would ever notice. Another says his tail gunner refuses to load the first belt unless he taps the ammo box exactly 7 times. You do not know which stories are true. You only know that even in a war of industrial precision, humans keep a secret corner for bargains with luck. You pause at the waist windows and look at the line of fortresses stretching into the mist. Some are pristine, some wear patched skin and fresh paint over old holes. You have seen photos of B-17 seconds returning with damage that looks impossible to survive. The image is inspiring and also mildly rude, because it suggests you might need that toughness today. Historians still argue whether the nickname Flying Fortress shaped how crews perceived risk, encouraging a faith in survivability that sometimes drifted away from the brutal math of loss rates. Standing under your own aircraft, you suspect the truth is mixed. The nickname is Comfort. Comfort helps you function. Your pilot finishes his scan with the quiet seriousness of a man counting exits in a crowded theatre. He checks tires and landing gear. He studies the engines again. The navigator rechecks his kit, even though he just reviewed it in the briefing. The bombardier checks protective covers and sight mechanisms. Your engineer confirms oxygen fittings with extra care. Joke 3 arrives when someone says, "The oxygen system is the only thing on this plane that gets more attention than everyone's haircuts." The laugh is brief, but grateful because you all know oxygen failures are not funny. The sun creeps higher. Engines on nearby aircraft begin warming, and the sound grows into a low, rolling choir. The airfield feels like a giant breath being drawn. This is the threshold between the human and the mechanical. You have done your checks. The ground crew has done theirs. The fortress is as ready as it can be. Readiness is not certainty. It is simply the best you can build with knowledge, discipline, and that pocket-sized faith you pretend you do not have. You climb aboard again. The smell of fuel and oil follows you inside like a familiar ghost. Your stations await. Your crew's voices settle into the intercom, steadier now. For one last heartbeat before taxi, you rest your palm against the cold inner skin of the aircraft and silently ask it to do what it was made to do. Fly straight. Take the hits if they come. Bring you back to this same patch of English ground, where the coffee will still be terrible and the jokes will still be necessary. The engines are warm now, not just running but settled into that confident, chest-deep roar that turns a cold airfield into something alive. You are strapped in, headset on, fingers testing switches you could probably find in the dark. Your lucky coin sits exactly where you left it, not because you think it controls physics, but because it anchors the part of you that still wants a small, friendly universe. The pilot calls for taxi, and the fortress begins to move, with the slow stubbornness of a fully loaded animal. You feel every pound of fuel and ordnance in the way the aircraft doesn't so much glide as negotiate with the ground. The nose is high, the view forward imperfect, and the airfield is a maze of other bombers inching toward the same shared moment of commitment. This is a mainstream fact you have learned, and now feel in your bones. A B-17 on a combat mission can be heavy enough that takeoff is a carefully managed event, not a casual hop. The aircraft needs runway, firm engine performance, and a pilot who understands that the first few minutes are where an ordinary problem can become a permanent one. You have heard the numbers in training. Now you can feel them as weight and vibration. The line of fortresses ahead of you looks like a slow-moving parade of steel whales. Somewhere nearby, someone is probably playing music on a portable radio, though it is mostly swallowed by the engines. The ground crew signals with crisp arm movements that feel almost theatrical in the early daylight. Joke 1 arrives quietly over the intercom, when someone says the bomber is so heavy today that if you drop a sandwich, it probably counts as added ballast. You exhale a laugh into your mask. It is a small sound, but it helps. You reach the holding point. The pilot runs through the final checks. The engineer calls out manifold pressure and RPM readings. The co-pilot confirms flaps and trim. Each voice is calm, almost domestic, like the most complicated kitchen routine you have ever heard. Then the tower clears you, and the pilot turns onto the runway. The fortress aligns with the long, straight strip of concrete and grass beyond it. There is a brief moment where time tightens. All the planning and briefing and pre-flight ritual shrink into one simple question. Will this machine behave? The throttles advance. The engines rise from a steady roar into something bigger, a coordinated thunder that makes your ribcage buzz. The aircraft surges forward. You feel the wheels rattle over seams in the runway. The tail begins to lift. The nose attitude changes. The world beyond the glass shifts slightly, and your stomach agrees to trust the pilot one more time. You are not just taking off. You are peeling a loaded fortress away from the ground with nothing but controlled explosions in 4 engines and a shared willingness to believe in the checklist. The speed builds. The pilot holds it steady. The engineer watches temperatures like a man guarding candles in a windstorm. The co-pilot's hands hover, ready. Then the wheels leave the runway, and the fortress is suddenly a flying object instead of an argument with gravity. The first seconds feel oddly gentle. The aircraft climbs with a slow, deliberate confidence. The pilot calls for gear up. The mechanical shudder of the wheels retracting is a sound that always feels like a door closing behind you. Joke 2 slips in at the exact right time. Someone says, "Great, now we can't pretend we were just out for a scenic taxi." The laugh is soft and short but real. You are climbing into a sky that looks too clean for what you know is coming. You pass over hedgerows, roads, and stone villages that seem to belong to a different world. The channel waits ahead again, that slate-coloured boundary between home and hazard. As you climb, the formation begins to assemble. This part can be as stressful as any combat moment, even if no enemy is present. B-17 groups gather at specific altitudes and points, circling and joining into larger streams that will eventually cross the coast as a moving city of bombers. You have seen it described as a ballet in the sky. In practice, it often feels like trying to merge onto a highway in a blizzard while driving a truck the size of a building. You watch other fortresses slide into view, close enough that you can see crew silhouettes through tiny windows. The spacing has to be tight enough for mutual defense later, but safe enough to avoid collisions now. The pilot's hands stay steady. The co-pilot keeps scanning. The engineer keeps calling numbers. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Half rumor, half tradition. You hear that some crews once tossed a single coin or a small object out of the waist window during early assembly, a private gesture meant to pay the sky for safe passage. It is probably nonsense, probably against common sense and maybe even regulations. But you understand the impulse. Humans love the idea that luck can be negotiated with pocket change. Historians still argue whether the early reliance on large, unescorted or lightly escorted daylight formations was a necessary risk to achieve strategic effects, or an avoidable gamble that cost too many crews before tactics and long-range fighter cover evolved. You can practically feel that argument hovering somewhere above the chaos of assembling aircraft. The debate is intellectual on paper. Up here, it is personal. The climb continues. The world below shrinks toward map size. The sun climbs with you, turning the tops of clouds gold. Inside the aircraft, temperatures begin their slow slide toward cold. The heated suits, if you have them, hum with reluctant warmth. You check your oxygen lines again. Not because you doubt them, but because this is the stage where small oversights become big regrets. The weight of the bombs is still with you physically, but the psychological weight begins to shift. The aircraft feels lighter as fuel burns and altitude builds. You find yourself listening for the engines with an almost parental intensity. Each one has its own subtle voice. You learn to hear what normal sounds like, and you hope desperately that normal will keep showing up. Joke 3 arrives when someone says the real reason you climb so high is to get far enough away from the base coffee that it can't follow you. You smile despite yourself. You pass through layers of air that feel like moods. The lower altitude is noisy and busy. Mid-climb is procedural, almost calm. Higher still, the air thins, and the aircraft settles into its mission rhythm. You are not yet in the deep freeze of combat altitude, not yet faced with flak or fighters, but you can sense the threshold approaching. The formation begins to hold shape. The rhythm of voices steadies. The pilot checks in with the lead. The navigator confirms headings. The bombardier stays quiet, conserving the kind of focus that will be needed later. You glance once at the small token of luck you keep tucked away. Then you look out at the growing stream of fortresses around you and feel the strange comfort of numbers. You are one aircraft among many, one crew among hundreds, climbing into a shared sky. And for this moment at least, the fortress is doing exactly what it promised. The climb finishes turning into a kind of suspended life. The formation steadies into a shape that looks confident from a distance and feels like constant micro-corrections from inside your seat. The engines keep their layered harmony, and the world below fades into the soft abstraction of maps and memory. You are high enough now that the sky doesn't feel like weather anymore. It feels like a place with rules that weren't designed for bodies. The cold arrives in stages, like a slow, polite invasion. First, your toes complain, then your fingers begin to decide they would rather be decorative than functional. You shift your shoulders, adjust your gloves, and try to stay ahead of the frost that wants to turn every hinge in your body into a creaky door. This is one of those mainstream historical truths that is simple and brutal. The B-17 is not pressurized. At the altitudes you commonly operate, the air is thin enough to make you stupid and sleepy in the worst possible way. Oxygen masks are not optional accessories. They are life support that also happens to flatten your voice into a nasal radio ghost. You clip in, check flow, and take the first steady breaths that feel both mechanical and intimate. You learn quickly that oxygen is not just about breathing, it is about thinking. Without it, your brain starts to drift into the soft fog of hypoxia, and that fog is the opposite of soothing in a war zone. It can make you euphoric, sloppy, and dangerously convinced that everything is fine. The irony is almost funny if it weren't so lethal. You watch the crew settle into the high-altitude version of themselves. The pilot grows quieter, conserving energy and attention. The navigator does his calculations with the deliberate patience of a monk keeping ancient time. The bombardier checks his equipment again, not because something changed, but because your mind craves small certainties when the big ones are missing. The heated suits, if you have them, and if they behave, provide a kind of reluctant warmth that feels like a ghost of comfort. You can almost imagine some engineer back in a warm office thinking, yes, this should do. Up here, with the temperature outside flirting with the kind of cold that makes metal brittle, the warmth is less luxury and more permission to keep using your hands. Joke 1 floats through the intercom when someone says the heated suit is basically a very expensive electric blanket that decided to enlist. The laugh is muffled by masks, but it ripples anyway. The windows begin to frost at their edges. Your breath leaves faint traces where it escapes the mask seal. The aircraft creaks and flexes in the cold, a reminder that even the flying fortress is a living thing in its own mechanical way. You glance at the wing and see the thin white of contrails streaming behind you, a delicate signature written across the sky for anyone below to interpret. For the gunners, this altitude is a special form of punishment. The ball turret gunner is curled into a cramped sphere of plexiglass and steel, a human folded into a role that is both essential and mildly insulting to comfort. The waist gunners stand near open positions that can feel like trying to heat your bedroom while someone keeps a window cracked in January. The tail gunner sits alone in the back, where the cold feels personal. You check your own station. You flex your fingers and rotate your wrists. You learn to do everything with a little more intention because speed wastes warmth. A quirky tidbit surfaces in the way. Crews manage the small humiliations of survival at altitude. The relief tube exists for a reason, and that reason is that nobody wants to discuss human biology in a mythic bomber narrative. But the truth is practical. You are a person in a machine for hours. The war does not pause for polite bodily scheduling, so the aircraft provides a solution that is about as elegant as a garden hose in a blizzard. Joke 2 arrives because someone inevitably claims the relief tube is the most honest piece of equipment on the plane. It doesn't care about rank. It doesn't care about medals. It just wants you to aim like your life depends on not making your own day worse. You chuckle, and then you silently thank the inventor. The cold also warps time. Minutes feel longer because each one demands attention. You are constantly making tiny calculations about comfort and function. Do you loosen a glove for dexterity and risk numbness? Do you keep it tight and risk clumsy mistakes? You find a rhythm where you move just enough to stay awake and warm without burning energy you might need later. Somewhere near your oxygen mask, your breath sounds louder than it should. That steady in and out becomes the soundtrack of this altitude. A calm metronome that helps your nerves settle into something manageable. Historians still argue whether the chosen operational altitudes in the early and mid-war years struck the best balance between bomber survivability and bombing accuracy, especially when weather, flak sealing, and fighter tactics all push the calculus in different directions. Up here, you can feel both sides of that argument in your bones. Higher can mean safer from some threats and more vulnerable to others. Higher can mean colder, slower, and less forgiving if things go wrong. You glance at the instrument panel readouts you can see from your position, watching temperature needles and pressure values that look like a different language of survival. The engineer calls out a minor adjustment. The pilot acknowledges. The fortress continues to breathe and climb and settle. Your mind wanders because this is the last long stretch before the sky turns hostile. You think of England below, of the dull, safe shape of the coastline you left behind. You think of the briefing map with that red line that now feels less like a drawing and more like a path you are physically carving through air. Joke 3 arrives softly, when someone says that at this altitude, the only thing thinner than the air is everyone's patience for the coffee thermos that's already gone cold. The laughter is quiet and grateful. You take a moment to look around the interior of the aircraft. It is not spacious. It is not kind. It is a narrow metal spine connecting people who are each managing their own small circle of discomfort. But the intercom keeps you together. A quick check-in from a gunner, a brief confirmation from the navigator, a low joke from the radio operator. These tiny sounds are warmth of a different kind. The cold sharpens your senses in a strange way. You notice everything. The faint vibration changes when the pilot trims slightly. The subtle shift in engine tone when fuel flow is adjusted. The way the aircraft seems to settle more comfortably into formation once the climbing is done. You also notice the sky itself, a deepening blue that looks almost unreal. The sun is bright but stingy with heat. The clouds below are soft and innocent looking, like they have no idea what is about to happen over the continent. You cannot see Germany yet, not clearly, but you can feel the direction of it in the way the crew's chatter reduces. The ritual of oxygen checks returns. The small adjustments to scarves and gloves, the quiet, collective agreement to focus. This is not combat yet. It is the spiritual antechamber to it. Your body is being tested by the environment before the enemy even gets a vote. And as you breathe that cold, managed oxygen and listen to the engines hold steady, you understand why this altitude feels like its own battlefield. The fortress is strong, yes, but the human inside it has to be strong in quieter, more stubborn ways. You finally level off into the mission altitude that makes your breath feel like an assignment, and your fingertips feel like they're paying rent in numbness. The high-altitude quiet from a few minutes ago is gone now, replaced by the social choreography of dozens of aircraft trying to become one moving idea. You slide into the combat box. From the outside, the formation looks like geometric confidence. From the inside, it feels like controlled panic with excellent manners. The lead ships hold pace and heading, and everyone else stacks into assigned positions that create overlapping fields of fire. This is one of the mainstream facts about the B-17 war over Europe. Tight formations are a tactical answer to enemy fighters, a way to turn many vulnerable aircraft into one bristling defensive organism. You call it a box, but it is really a three-dimensional neighborhood of propellers, contrails, and thrust. A fortress holds station off your wingtip, close enough that you can read the posture of the pilot through the glass if you squint, far enough that you pray both of you will never need to test the margin. Another bomber sits slightly above and ahead, a quiet guardian whose guns will help cover your weak angles later. The pilot's voice is calm, but you hear the extra concentration in it. Ease it in. Hold that spacing. Watch your closure rate. The co-pilot scans like a person counting exits in a crowded theatre. Only this theatre is moving at altitude and filled with four-engine giants. Your navigator confirms assembly timing. The radio operator passes along group calls. The engineer quietly reminds you that formation flying is expensive in fuel and patience. The gunners, for the moment, are spectators with jobs waiting in the wings. Joke 1 slips in when a waist gunner says, "This is the only time in your life you'll be asked to park a house next to another house while going 150 miles an hour. You feel the air buffeting from a nearby aircraft's slipstream. The fortress is sturdy, but air is a jealous medium, and it does not love having big wings arguing in the same space. The pilot trims, adjusts throttle, and makes the tiny corrections that save you from drifting too close. You learn that formation discipline is not a single dramatic action. It is 1,000 boring, vital decisions per hour. Below, the clouds roll like a soft sea. Above, the sky is a thin blue ceiling. Between those layers, you and your neighbors hold a pattern that depends on human precision in an environment that punishes human error. A quirky tidbit surfaces over the intercom. Somebody claims that a crew once used a pocket harmonica during long assembly spirals, playing a sleepy tune that made nearby pilots waggle their wings in mock applause. It sounds absurd. It is probably true in spirit, even if the specific harmonica is a legend. Joke 2 arrives when someone says, "If you ever want to experience true intimacy, try flying so close to another bomber that you can recognize their nose art from memory and still pretend you're not staring." The bomber stream thickens as groups join other groups. You are now one link in a long aerial chain crossing toward the continent, a daylight river of aluminum following the route you saw on the map. The channel slips beneath you like a grey ribbon, and you hope the weather stays cooperative long enough for the formation to settle into its strongest shape. The discipline has a reason beyond survival. Bombing accuracy depends on stable runs and coordinated timing. The lead bombardier often sets the release point for the formation, and some missions rely on the idea that bombs fall together to concentrate effect. Historians still argue whether the classic combat box was the best solution for survival, or a comforting doctrine that sometimes reduced flexibility. The answer shifts with time, escort range, and enemy innovation. Up here, you feel both truths at once. The box is protection. The box is a promise you must keep. Your pilot maintains position with quiet stubbornness. He uses the horizon, the lead ship, and the subtle dance of engine sound. Your engineer watches fuel consumption and reminds everyone, gently, that no one wins an argument with physics. The navigator updates wind drift, small corrections that could keep you with the stream instead of becoming the lone dot every fighter hunts. The gunners begin small preparations, checking ammo feeds again, flexing fingers, shifting boots. The top turret gunner checks rotation. The ball turret gunner confirms interphone and oxygen. Joke 3 pops out when the radio operator says the formation is so tight that if anyone drops a wrench, it will probably land in a neighboring squadron's coffee cup. You hold your station and discover how exhausting this quiet part of the mission can be. A single lapse in attention could lead to a mid-air collision. A single wrong throttle input could cause you to drift into another bomber's wake. You sit still, but your mind stays in motion. There is also a strange sense of anonymity. Surrounded by so many aircraft, your individual fear feels diluted. You are not alone in the sky. You are part of a system. That system is also what the enemy sees. Large, obvious, and worth attacking. So you focus on the present details. Sunlight flashing off a wingtip, contrails braiding behind your group, the intercom quieting as each man finds his balance between vigilance and conserving energy. You remember the base coffee, the pre-flight touch of cold metal, the lucky coin in your pocket. These small callbacks feel silly, but they ground you. As the formation stabilizes into the clean geometry the planners want, you allow yourself a thin sliver of appreciation. It is extraordinary, this many humans and machines agreeing to behave with synchronized intent. It is also fragile, held together by training and patience. For now, the sky is only cold and crowded. The fortress holds station. The box breathes as one. The geometry of the box has barely settled into your muscles when the continent begins to announce itself in a new language. The clouds thin and break. The ground below sharpens into rivers, roads, fields, and towns that look calm enough to be postcards. That calm is the trick. Over the intercom, a voice from lead says something simple, something almost casual. Flak expected shortly. You think you know what that means. You have read about it. You have heard the veteran stories delivered with that practiced half-smile that says, "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to be honest without ruining breakfast." But knowing a word and meeting its reality are two different experiences. The first bursts appear far off, black specks in the distance, like ink drops scattered across the sky. You might even squint and think of fireworks if your brain wants to protect you with a friendly comparison. Then the bursts get closer, bigger, louder in your imagination, even before you hear anything. This is one of the mainstream facts of your new world. German anti-aircraft artillery, especially the heavy guns designed to reach bombers at altitude, forms belts of defense around major targets and approach routes. It is organized, experienced, and brutally persistent. The shells are timed to explode at your altitude, throwing fragments into the sky like invisible traps. From a distance, it looks like an abstract storm. From within it, it becomes personal. The intercom tightens. You hear the pilot's voice shift into that concentrated rhythm you now recognize. The co-pilot calls out small adjustments. The engineer checks engine readings. The navigator confirms timing over pre-identified flak zones. You are still in formation, still obedient to the rules that say your best chance is to stay inside the protective geometry of your neighbors. The discipline that felt like a stressful rehearsal a little while ago now feels like a rope bridge you cannot let go of. The first near burst is not a single sound. It is a layered impression. A faint thump you feel more than hear. A quick rattle of the aircraft skin. The sudden awareness that the sky can punch you without warning. Joke one tries to pry open a little air in your chest. Someone mutters that the Germans are apparently hosting the world's least relaxing fireworks show. The laugh that follows is brief and nervous. But it reminds you that humor is still allowed. You look out and see the black puffs clustering closer to the formation. It is not aimed at you alone. It is aimed at the streaming city of bombers. The sky begins to look painted with danger. The flak is not random in the sense of being careless. It is patterned chaos. The batteries calculate your speed and altitude and try to lay a predicted curtain of bursts exactly where you will be. Sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes they get it horrifyingly right. The cruelty is that the gun crews on the ground do not need to see your face to do their work well. You feel the fortress shudder again, a stronger jolt this time. The pilot holds formation anyway. The rule is painful and clear. You do not dodge aggressively unless you have to, because one panicked movement can ripple through the box, causing collisions or opening defensive gaps. Your body wants to flinch. Your training says don't. The gunners start talking to each other in short, clipped phrases. The top turret swivels slowly. The waist gunners brace. The tail gunner calls out the shape of the world behind you like a man reading weather that has teeth. A quirky tidbit finds its way into your mind, because even now, even here, the brain does odd things. You remember hearing that some crews believed flak had a rhythm, that if you listened hard enough, you could sense when a barrage was about to walk closer. Others swore by absurd little tricks like chewing gum at the first sight of black bursts to stop their jaw from locking in fear. The science is questionable. The comfort is real. The bombardier in the nose is quiet. He may be watching the approach to the target, trying to hold the future steady in his sight line. The navigator checks headings with a steadiness that already feels heroic in its ordinariness. Joke too slips in like a small life raft. The radio operator says the flak looks like the sky trying to cook burnt popcorn. Nobody laughs for a full second, and then someone does, and the sound is almost grateful. The bursts multiply. The closer you get to defended industrial areas, rail hubs, and cities, the more the flak seems to thicken into a kind of dark weather. You are told to expect it. Expectation does not reduce the visceral shock of seeing explosions at your altitude. A sudden louder crack hits the airframe. The fortress jolts. For a heartbeat, everyone goes still. The engineer calls out a quick status. The pilot responds without raising his voice. Your plane has taken a reminder. You check systems and your own senses. Everything still works. The B-17's reputation for toughness is not just propaganda. You've seen patched skin, stories of bombers returning with control surfaces damaged, engines out, fuselages perforated. The aircraft is built with redundancy and with a kind of stubborn practicality. That sturdiness is why you are here, counting breaths instead of counting losses. Historians still argue whether changes in route planning and timing later in the campaign significantly reduced flak effectiveness, or whether the reductions in losses were more driven by improved escorts, better intelligence, and the cumulative erosion of German defensive capacity. Up here, debate feels like a luxury, but the idea that strategy evolves offers you a small, tired hope. The worst part of flak, you realize, is the feeling of helplessness within discipline. Fighters are an enemy you can imagine outmaneuvering or outshooting. Flak is a giant invisible net you have to fly through on schedule. Joke 3 arrives in a whisper from a waist gunner who says, "I always wanted to travel more. I didn't mean through a sky full of angry confetti." The laugh is not big, but it resets your breathing. You keep formation. You watch your neighbor aircraft absorb the same black bursts. You see tiny flashes of metal glinting where sunlight hits passing fragments. You also see how quickly the human mind learns to normalize the unbelievable. After a few minutes of sustained barrage, your panic begins to narrow into focus. That focus is survival's quiet genius. The pilot's hands remain steady. The co-pilot keeps scanning, spacing. The navigator counts time over the flak belt. The bombardier remains locked into the forward world where the target waits. The atmosphere inside the fortress is now a blend of oxygen hiss, engine thrum, and careful voices. You are not romantically brave. You are functionally brave, which is much more useful. You do your job. Then, as abruptly as it began, the flak eases. The black puffs thin behind you. The sky ahead looks deceptively clean again. You do not relax yet. You know this is only your first taste of the defended airspace, a preview of what can concentrate thickly near the target itself. But even that brief passage has changed something in you. The war is no longer an idea you carry. It has touched your aircraft with a sharp knuckle. You glance at the interior skin, at the rivets you touched during pre-flight, and you think about how each one is holding a promise under stress. The fortress keeps flying. You keep breathing. The black flak puffs thin behind you, and for a few minutes you let your shoulders drop just enough to remember they exist. The formation hums forward, still tight, still stubborn, still looking like a moving city that refuses to admit it is scared. Your oxygen mask makes every breath sound official, like you are signing paperwork with your lungs. Then the next threat announces itself the way predators often do, not with a roar, but with shape and speed at the edge of your vision. A call comes over the intercom from a gunner who has been scanning the horizon with the patience of someone watching a pot that might explode. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. You lean toward your window, and there they are, small dark dots that sharpen into single-engine fighters. The sky does not feel wide anymore. It feels crowded with intention. This is a mainstream fact of your world over Germany. The Luftwaffe attacks bomber streams with tactics that exploit angles, speed, and short windows of opportunity. They favor head-on passes to cut exposure time. They dive out of the sun when they can. They hunt the weak edges because the box is strong until a seam opens. You remember Section 7's tight geometry, and you understand why it mattered so much. Drift off your neighbors, and you become a story the enemy can finish quickly. The top turret begins to rotate. The tail gunner calls out bearings in a voice that is calm enough to make you trust him. The waist gunners adjust stances and check ammo feeds one more time, as if repetition can steady muscle memory. Joke 1 flickers through the intercom when someone says, "And here I was hoping the flak was the entertainment portion of the flight." The fighters close. Sunlight flashes along wings. Tracers begin to stitch bright lines through the cold air, and you are suddenly aware that your home in the sky is also a porcupine. A head-on attack is a special kind of nightmare. The closure speed is enormous. Your brain wants to slow time with sheer willpower. It doesn't. The nose guns chatter. The top turret joins. The fighters flash closer and then peel away in a steep break that looks almost elegant if you ignore what it means. A quirky tidbit your crew has whispered about becomes relevant now. Some German units use heavy underwing rockets to disrupt formations, launching from farther out and hoping the blast or shock scatters bombers into easier targets. The idea sounds almost cartoonish until you watch the box tighten reflexively, every pilot bracing against the possibility of sudden chaos. Joke 2 arrives in a dry mutter from the engineer. If they're firing rockets at us, does that mean we've officially upgraded from hard day at work to boss fight? The fighters circle and return. You see a nearby B-17 take a brief burst that looks like pinpricks from your angle. It holds position, and the sight of that stubbornness steadies something inside you. This is where you start to appreciate the escorts with something close to affection. Somewhere above or alongside you. Fighters are hunting the hunters. Depending on the date and the mission, You may be protected by P-47 seconds, P-38 seconds, or the long-legged P-51 seconds that can follow the stream deeper into Germany. You might not see them clearly, but you sense their effect in the way some enemy fighters hesitate, break off early, or get dragged into swirling dogfights that pull them away from your altitude. Historians still argue whether the decisive turning point in bomber survivability was primarily the arrival of truly long-range escort, the cumulative attrition of experienced Luftwaffe pilots, or improvements in bomber tactics and intelligence. Up here, the answer feels like a braided rope. You accept any strand that keeps you breathing. A fighter darts in low on your left. The waist gunner tracks it, calls it, fires. The tracers look beautiful in a way that feels morally confusing. You remind yourself that beauty is not the point, survival is. The radio operator relays a terse message from Group Command. Hold formation. Do not chase. The instruction is obvious, and yet fear makes humans inventive in all the wrong directions. Joke 3 comes from the co-pilot, who says, "Everybody stay calm. The plane is only being aggressively inspected." The enemy tactics are not uniform. Some slant in from above, some sit outside your effective range and try to pick at the edges. You hear the tail gunner warn that a small cluster seems to be organizing for something heavier than quick single passes. You have heard rumors about close-in, high-risk attacks meant to crack the box. You don't need the doctrinal name to understand the goal. So you cling to your assigned slot with an almost devotional intensity. The pilot makes tiny throttle changes. The co-pilot watches spacing like a hawk. The engineer hums quiet numbers. The navigator keeps working as if math can hold the sky together. You remember the pre-flight walk-around from Section 4, the way you touched old patches and new rivets. You remember Section 8's flak jolt. Different threat, same truth. You are being tested by forces that do not care who you are. A fighter slices past the nose, close enough to feel like an insult. A heartbeat later, a U.S. Escort streaks through in pursuit, and you feel a surge of gratitude that is embarrassingly fierce. The attack ebbs in waves. Your gunners keep scanning even as their arms ache. Your pilot keeps the fortress stable even as every instinct wants to jink away. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the enemy's focus shifts. Some fighters peel off. Some are drawn into fights you can only glimpse as tiny spirals against the blue. You are still alive. The box is still intact. The sky is still full of engines, breath, and stubbornness. And you learn the hard truth that sits underneath the flying fortress myth. The B-17 is tough, yes, but the real fortress is the discipline that keeps you from becoming a single, easy dot in a hostile sky. The fighters thin out just enough for you to remember the bigger monster waiting ahead. The formation tightens again, breathing into that rigid geometry that makes you feel both protected and trapped. The navigator's voice comes through with a calm that sounds practiced and slightly unreal. Approaching initial point. That phrase is small, almost tidy, but it flips a switch in the aircraft. This is no longer the long journey across cold air. This is the part where the target stops being a photograph on a board and becomes a real place under your nose. Your bombardier shifts into a different posture, the way a pianist sits when the room goes quiet. He checks the sight, checks the settings, checks his own hands. The pilot's voice is steady, but you can hear how carefully he is managing his breathing. The co-pilot scans the formation and the sky, with the intensity of someone trying to read the future off sunlight and contrails. A mainstream historical fact settles into your awareness like a lock clicking shut. The bomb run in a B-17 is typically flown straight and level for accuracy, often with the aircraft held steady so the bombardier can use the Norden bombsight. On many missions, especially as doctrine evolves, the lead bombardier can effectively set the release for the formation, meaning everyone's timing depends on that one calm pair of hands in the lead ship. In theory, it is elegant. In practice, it feels like volunteering to walk across a parking lot, while everyone with a rock collection gets a free throw. You feel the pilot reduce small corrections. Formation discipline becomes even stricter. The box is a living machine now. All of you are lining into an attack posture that prioritizes stability over individual comfort. You might be thinking about flak and fighters, but the bombardier is thinking about drift, speed, altitude, and the geometry of an invisible arc that ends in a burst of steel and fire far below. The bomb bay doors open. The sound is unmistakable, a mechanical groan that seems to let cold air and gravity into your bones. The aircraft changes slightly in feel. The drag increases, The fortress is now not only a bomber, it is an open-mouthed promise. Joke 1 slips out of someone's throat before he can stop it. Ah yes, the moment we turn the plane into the world's least subtle delivery van. No one laughs loudly, but the small chuckles are enough to keep your heart from climbing out of your chest entirely. The flak returns with a new intimacy. Near the target, the bursts seem thicker, angrier, and more accurate. The black puffs bracket the formation with a grim professionalism. You hear the tail gunner call out nothing at all, which is his way of telling you he is watching everything. The pilot's hands go light on the controls, because any sudden maneuver risks throwing off the bomb run and rippling instability through the box. You are reminded that this is the most vulnerable part of the mission, and vulnerable here means you are asking men on the ground to predict where you will be in 30 seconds, while you obediently continue to meet their prediction. The bombardier calls out small instructions. Steady. Hold it. Little left. You cannot see his face clearly from your station, but you can imagine the tunnel vision settling in. The bomb sight view narrows the universe down to a target rectangle, a crosshair, a distant shape that must become a precise point. A quirky tidbit rises up from the folklore of this war. You've heard that the Norden bomb sight was treated like a crown jewel, sometimes transported in a locked case, with secrecy drilled into crews, as if accuracy itself were classified. It was sold as a marvel that could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from high altitude under ideal conditions. The legend is comforting, but your experience is reminding you that the sky is rarely ideal. Historians still argue whether the Norden's reputed precision was ever realistically achievable in combat conditions over Europe, given weather, smoke, evasive pressures, and the sheer violence of defended airspace. Up here, the debate feels less philosophical and more like a question that is rattling your aircraft with black bursts. You hear the engineer call out a brief status. Engines good. Systems stable. The pilot answers with a short acknowledgement that says, I am not speaking more than I have to right now. The radio operator keeps his ear on group calls. The navigator's numbers continue to tick forward. You can tell he is trying to keep the route and timing anchored, even as your attention wants to implode inward. Joke 2 arrives, dry as a cracker. The engineer mutters that this is the only job where "don't move" is considered an advanced survival technique. The flak feels closer. A burst blooms off your right side, and you feel the fortress flinch. The pilot holds steady anyway. Your body hates this. Your training understands it. The gunners are firing less now unless a fighter appears, because the priority is staying locked into the box and not wasting attention. You hear occasional bursts, then silence. Your bombardier's voice tightens slightly. Coming up, your breathing slows, not because you are calm, but because you are concentrating on being useful. This is a strange truth you discover repeatedly in war. Fear can either scatter you or narrow you into a tool. The target slides beneath you. For a heartbeat, time feels weightless. Then the bombardier calls it. Bombs away. The fortress lurches upward slightly as the load releases. The change in weight is physical and immediate, like someone removing a heavy backpack you forgot you were wearing. Somewhere in the belly of the aircraft, metal doors and racks complete the motion that your entire mission has been built around. Joke 3 slips out with a breath of relief. Congratulations, gentlemen. We have successfully unburdened ourselves of responsibility. That earns a quiet laugh, the kind that is half gratitude and half disbelief that you are still here to make jokes at all. The pilot begins gentle adjustments as the bomb bay doors close. The formation starts to loosen, just enough to regain a more flexible defensive posture. It is not a sudden, dramatic break. It is a controlled exhale. But you are not done. The target area is still the most dangerous air around you. Flak continues to reach up with stubborn accuracy. You feel another shudder. The engineer checks. The pilot acknowledges. You glance out at the neighboring fortresses. They are still there, still flying, still holding shape despite the black flowers of explosion around them. The box has done what it was designed to do. Keep enough steel and discipline clustered together that you can reach this point and survive it. The moral weight of the moment flickers at the edge of your mind, but your brain shoves it aside because survival is still in progress. You can worry about history's judgment later. Right now, you need engines, oxygen, and a route home. The navigator calls the turn. The pilot responds. The fortress begins to shift away from the target, the way a swimmer finally pulls away from a rip current. You feel a thin wash of relief that is almost suspicious. You know fighters may still return. You know the journey back can be just as cruel, but something fundamental has changed. The bomb run, with its straight and level vulnerability, is behind you. You are still in the war, but you have passed through the narrowest door in the mission's architecture and come out on the far side with your crew's voices still in your ears. You turn away from the target with the kind of careful relief that feels almost illegal. The bomb run is behind you, the bay doors are closed, and for one sweet minute your brain wants to believe the hardest part is over. Then the fortress reminds you that war doesn't always follow tidy order. A harsh vibration ripples through the fuselage. The engineer's voice cuts in, steadier than you feel. Number 3's running rough. You wait for panic to arrive. It doesn't, not all at once. It comes in thin sheets. First, the quick inventory of what you just survived. Then the cold realization that you are still deep in hostile air, and now one of your 4 promises is starting to stutter. This is a mainstream historical fact you've heard repeated like a warning label. B-17 seconds often returned with significant damage, and crews routinely had to manage failing engines, shredded control surfaces, and punctured fuselages. The aircraft's redundancy mattered, but only if the people inside could improvise under pressure. The pilot trims and holds the formation slot as long as he can. The co-pilot scans your neighbors. The navigator checks where you are relative to the planned exit route. The radio operator prepares to report trouble. In the waist, you hear a quick curse that stays just polite enough for PG-13. Someone follows it with joke 1, a tired line about how the engines chose an inconvenient moment to express their feelings. The laugh is short, but it keeps your mind from sprinting ahead into catastrophe. The engineer starts the careful dance of diagnosis, listening to tone and watching gauges, mixture, boost, temps, pressures. He calls numbers like he is reading the plane a bedtime story. You glance out at the wing. The prop still spins, but the rhythm looks wrong, like a drummer missing the beat. "Feather if we have to," the pilot says. That phrase is strange comfort. Feathering a prop to reduce drag on a dead engine is a procedural lifeline you memorize and hope you never use. Today might be the day. A few minutes pass, the engine coughs, stabilizes, then coughs again. You remain in the box, though the pilot edges slightly, to maintain safe spacing with weaker power. Then the second surprise arrives. A waist gunner calls, "We've got a hole back here." You don't need him to specify where. You can feel the draft. The cold is sharper, more directional, the sort of chill that means the airplane's skin has been opened to the stratosphere. You remember Section 4's walk-around, the patched metal that seemed reassuring on the ground. A quirky tidbit surfaces from crew folklore. Some units carried small emergency patching materials, and there are stories of men stuffing cloth, spare gear, even map cases into jagged openings to tame the airflow. The point wasn't elegance. It was keeping hands warm enough to work and preventing loose panels from tearing wider. The engineer moves aft briefly to assess what needs immediate attention and what can wait. The pilot keeps the aircraft steady. The co-pilot watches the horizon. The navigator recalculates time and fuel with the quiet terror of an accountant working during an earthquake. Joke 2 drifts in when someone says the fortress is now officially more ventilation than design. The humor is dry as snow. The intercom crackles with efficient updates. Other crews have damage too. You're not alone in this phase of the mission. That knowledge is both comforting and bleak. Historians still argue whether the early daylight campaign's heavy losses and damage were an unavoidable price for crippling German industry, or whether alternate strategies could have achieved similar effects with fewer crews paying the bill in frost and wreckage. Sitting with a sick engine and a new wind leak, you don't feel like a chess piece. You feel like a living receipt. The pilot finally makes the call. Feather 3. The engineer confirms the procedure. The prop's angle shifts. The spinning disc slows into a quieter, obedient shape. Drag drops. The aircraft steadies. The fortress now flies on 3 hearts instead of 4. You expect an immediate sinking feeling. Instead, you feel a weird clarity. A problem has been named and managed. The unknown has become a checklist item, but now your place in formation becomes precarious. With reduced power, staying in the protective geometry is harder. The lead acknowledges you may need a slightly looser position. Everyone knows what that means without saying it. You are closer to the edge. The pilot may even ease the nose down a few hundred feet, not enough to break the group plan, just enough to keep your 3 healthy engines from being bullied into overheating. The engineer adjusts cowl flaps and fuel flow, coaxing the remaining power plants like tired horses on the last hill. Your oxygen mask stays on, because this is not the time to let hypoxia sneak in with its fake optimism. The aircraft feels subtly lopsided, a gentle pull you can sense in your hips and shoulders, reminding you that this airplane can be wounded and still be stubborn, as long as you stay just as stubborn with it. The tail gunner grows more talkative, calling scan sectors and warning of any suspicious specks. The top turret tracks slowly. Joke 3 arrives gently. The co-pilot says, "On the bright side, we're lighter now, emotionally and mechanically." The laugh is thin but real. The navigator suggests a safer route home that skirts the worst-known flak belts. The pilot approves. The radio operator passes your status. The engineer watches the remaining engines with the protective intensity of someone guarding 3 candles in a storm. Another B-17 slides into view, also wounded, flying with an engine out and a ragged flap. The sight is quiet companionship. 2 battered fortresses heading west, refusing to become easy endings. You settle into the stubborn logic of recovery. Small trim changes, careful fuel management, a constant scan for fighters who prefer lonely prey. The cold bites, fatigue grows heavy, yet the crew's voices remain steady, and that steadiness becomes its own kind of heat. The mission isn't a single dramatic moment. It's this: the improvisation, the quiet teamwork, the refusal to give the enemy an easy story. The fortress keeps flying on 3 engines. So do you. You try to hold the edge of the box as long as you can, but 3 engines do not negotiate with pride. The formation begins to pull ahead in tiny, cruel increments, the way a crowd naturally moves faster than the person with the limp. The pilot keeps the fortress as steady as physics allows. The co-pilot scans your neighbors, and then the growing strip of empty air that is quietly forming between you and safety. The radio operator sends your status. The navigator checks fuel, wind, and the shifting weather over the return route. The engineer watches the remaining engines like a man guarding 3 lanterns in a tunnel. Then the moment arrives without drama. You are no longer inside the main formation. You are close enough to see your group's contrails, far enough to feel the loneliness in your teeth. This is a mainstream historical truth that every B-17 crew learns, sometimes gently and sometimes the hard way. Stragglers are at greater risk. A bomber that falls out of formation becomes a more attractive target for fighters because it loses the overlapping protection of the box. That is doctrine written in the simplest language possible. Stay with the herd, because wolves prefer the one who is tired and alone. The pilot doesn't say, "We're a straggler now." He doesn't need to. The silence in the intercom says it for him. You resettle into a new rhythm. The mission has shifted from collective strategy to personal navigation. The sky no longer feels like a highway with orderly lanes. It feels like open country at night. The weather thickens ahead. A band of cloud drifts across your route, and you face the classic trade of survival. Clouds can hide you. Clouds can also disorient you, freeze your surfaces, or tangle your navigation. Your navigator works through the numbers with that quiet faith in calculation that has kept crews from vanishing into the North Sea. Joke 1 arrives, soft and tired. Someone says your navigator could probably find his way home from inside a sack of potatoes as long as you give him a pencil. The laugh is small but appreciative. You rely on the radio more now. The operator listens for calls that confirm friendly positions, diversion fields, and any sudden warnings about enemy activity. The signals feel brittle, like thin glass bridges between you and the idea of home. A quirky tidbit surfaces in this liminal space between threat and relief. You remember hearing that some crews carried small personal compasses or even lucky trinkets tied to their charts, not because they distrusted official instruments, but because it gave them a private sense of agency. A tiny charm next to a map, as if a pocket-sized god could help keep the needle honest. You don't announce it, but you touch the edge of your lucky coin again, the same one that's been quietly travelling with you since that frozen dawn. The engineer calls out cylinder head temperatures. The pilot adjusts power settings to baby the remaining engines. You feel the fortress flying slightly differently now, like a stubborn old truck that still gets you where you need to go but complains the entire time. The cold draft from the hole in the fuselage nags at your side. It's a reminder that your world is held together by skin-thin structure and human willpower. A waist gunner wedges something into the gap to tame the airflow. Exactly the kind of unglamorous improvisation that never makes posters. Joke 2 slips in when he says, "If anyone asks, this is an innovative new ventilation system." The chuckle that follows is almost affectionate. You scan the sky constantly. The tail gunner's calls become your heartbeat. The top turret rotates in slow arcs. Every speck, every glint, every shadow makes your pulse lift. But the fighters do not immediately return. Sometimes you are lucky. Sometimes the escorts and the chaos of the mainstream have pulled attention elsewhere. Sometimes the enemy is conserving fuel and picking only the most obvious isolated prey. You are isolated, yes, but you are also moving toward the edge of the danger zone. Your navigator calls the next landmark a river bend, a patch of coastline soon. The geometry of Europe becomes your staircase back to safety. Historians still argue whether the most effective method of reducing straggler losses was improved escort coverage, stricter formation discipline, or tactical innovations like better route planning and timing that minimized exposure windows. You can feel the truth of all three in the way your crew clings to procedure now. The debate is academic. Your solution is immediate. Keep the engines healthy. Keep the heading true. Keep scanning. The clouds thicken. You enter a grey world where distance becomes ambiguous. Ice is a quiet threat here. Even a hint of icing can change the stubborn math of lift and drag. The pilot adjusts altitude cautiously. The engineer monitors for any new vibration or temperature swings. The radio operator tries to stay connected to friendly calls that reassure you the channel is still where it should be and England still exists. Joke 3 arrives in the form of dark optimism. The co-pilot says, "On the bright side, if we get lost, we can just follow the smell of terrible coffee back to base." The laugh is thin, but it loosens the knot in your chest. You break out of the cloud band into a brighter patch of sky. The sun is lower now, making long, faint shadows on the cloud tops. The light is beautiful in a way that feels almost rude. The world is capable of looking peaceful, while you are fighting to keep 3 engines from becoming 2. The navigator's voice tightens with relief. Coastline ahead. You peer and finally see it. A thin line of land meeting water. The kind of edge you never cared about before the war taught you that borders can be emotional. The water beyond looks cold and endless, but it is also a promise. Once you cross it, the flak belts thin. The fighter threat changes. The odds tilt gently back toward you. Your radio operator catches a friendly call about weather over the bases. The signal crackles like a tired friend clearing his throat. Your pilot exhales. You feel it more than hear it. That exhale is permission for your body to allow a little hope. You cross the water in a quieter sky. The formation you left behind is now a distant smear of contrails. You are no longer part of the city. You are a lone car limping down the last miles of highway with hazard lights on. That comparison is almost funny, and you let it be a moment of calm. You remember the earlier stages of the day. The briefing curtain. The pre-flight touch of cold metal. The first flak bursts that looked like ink. The fighters that turned the sky into a dartboard of tracers. The bomb run where you had to hold steady while the universe tried to shake you loose. The engine failure and the hole in your skin. Each memory is a bead on a string you are still pulling toward home. England grows clearer. Fields, hedges, and roads reappear beneath you like familiar handwriting. You listen for the tower, for any instruction to divert, for the permission to land. Your engineer offers a final, quiet reassurance. The remaining engines are holding. The pilot nods, even though no one can see it. The fortress is battered but determined. So are you. And as you line up toward friendly ground, you realize the lonely road home is not just geography. It is a mental corridor you walk with your crew, step by step, refusing to let the day claim you after you've already come this far. You come in low, over English fields, that look impossibly ordinary after the fluorescent violence of the target area. The coastline is behind you now, the channel reduced to a memory you can almost pretend was just a cold dream. But the fortress is still wounded, and you are still living inside the last fragile minutes of a mission that refuses to be over until the wheels touch earth. The pilot talks you down with a voice that has spent all day learning to be calm on command. The co-pilot checks your approach speed and watches the runway like it might move out of the way as a final prank. The engineer babysits the 3 remaining engines, asking them politely to stay loyal for just a little longer. This is a mainstream truth of B-17 life that you now understand in your spine. A damaged bomber's landing is a disciplined, high-stakes routine. The aircraft is heavy even without its bomb load, possibly asymmetrical in performance, and the crew has to manage the exact combination of speed, flap settings, and engine power that keeps you from floating too long or dropping too hard. In a world of dramatic combat stories, The landing is the quiet exam that can still fail you. The runway expands in the windshield. The pilot eases the fortress down. The wheels meet the ground with a hard, grateful thump that feels like the war exhaling through the tires. You hear the rumble of concrete under you like a voice saying, "Finally." The pilot brakes carefully. The co-pilot helps keep the aircraft straight. The engineer monitors any last temperature spikes, because the universe can still be petty at the finish line. Joke one arrives with a tired breath. Someone says the runway is the most beautiful girl they've ever seen. The laugh that follows is not romantic. It is survival, flirting with relief. You taxi off the active strip, and the airfield feels louder than you remember. Engines from other returning ships layer into a ragged choir. Ambulances and fire crews stand by for aircraft that have not been as lucky or not been as stubborn. Ground crew wave you toward a parking area with the brisk, grateful efficiency of people who love seeing a plane return intact enough to be parked. When you finally shut down, the sudden quiet inside the airframe is almost shocking. The engine roar fades into ticking metal that cools slowly. The oxygen masks come off. Fresh air, thicker and warmer, feels like a miracle you did not properly appreciate this morning. You climb out into daylight that looks too gentle for the day you just had. The ground crew immediately starts circling your aircraft, pointing at the ragged hole patched with whatever cloth and willpower your waste gunner could find. They note the feathered engine. They count the new scars and talk in short bursts of technical language that is equal parts admiration and mild disbelief. A quirky tidbit slips into view when someone mentions the unofficial tradition of flak souvenirs. You hear that some crews kept small pieces of shrapnel if it was safe to retrieve, not as trophies in a cruel sense, but as proof that the sky tried and failed to finish the story. The officers might not love it, the mechanics might roll their eyes, but the human need to turn danger into a pocket-sized artifact is stubborn. You walk toward the debriefing area with legs that feel oddly too light, as if your body hasn't decided how heavy the day was allowed to be. Your crew is quiet in the way people get quiet when they are trying not to count. The debriefing room is less dramatic than the briefing room. No curtain reveal, no sharp suspense. Just paperwork, questions, and the slow conversion of lived terror into operational data. A mainstream fact you learn fast is that after missions, crews report flak intensity, fighter encounters, target visibility, bomb release times, and aircraft damage. These details feed the machine of the next day's plans. Your story becomes part of the war's statistical bloodstream. The intelligence officer asks what you saw. You answer in measured sentences that sound more composed than you feel. Heavy flak near the target. Fighters scattered, some head-on, some high. Engine failure after the bomb run. Forced to drop out of formation later. You watch the officer write notes that look too neat for the chaos they represent. Joke 2 creeps in when someone says the debrief is the only place where "I was terrified" gets translated into enemy activity moderate to heavy. It earns a quiet smile. The war loves euphemisms. Then comes the moment you always dread. You return to the barracks or the crew area and start the informal count. Who is back? Who is waiting for news? Who is not? You see empty chairs you didn't notice this morning. You pretend you didn't notice them now. The missing are not always officially missing yet. Sometimes they are overdue. Sometimes unconfirmed. Sometimes there is a rumor that a crew ditched in the channel and is being picked up. Sometimes someone says he saw a parachute and thinks it might have been one of yours. Your mind becomes a terrible radio, tuning itself to hope and fear in alternating static bursts. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of repeated missions was more shaped by the raw loss rate or by the uncertainty and rumor culture that followed each sortie, especially in units facing sustained high-intensity periods. You feel the answer shift inside you. The losses hurt. The not knowing hurts in a different, longer way. The waiting space is its own kind of battlefield. You wash up, and the water looks oddly dark as it runs off your hands. You realize you've been gripping metal and oxygen hoses and fear for hours. Your fingers thaw slowly. The sensation is half relief, half complaint. Somebody finds a way to produce coffee again. It is still terrible. You take it anyway. This drink is a ritual now, a normalizing agent, a way to tell your body, "See, we are back in the world where hot liquids exist." Joke 3 lands softly when someone says the coffee tastes like it was filtered through an engine cowling. You laugh more than the line deserves, because the laughter is also a release valve. The ground crew's admiration for your battered fortress becomes a small secondary story of the day. You hear words like, "She took a beating," and "good bird," and you feel a strange protective pride that your machine and your teamwork held together when the sky tried to pry you apart. You think of those rivets you touched in the pre-flight. You think of the black flak blooms like burnt popcorn. You think of the straight bomb run with your heart held still by discipline. Your crew drifts into small pockets of quiet conversation. Someone reads a letter that arrived yesterday but wasn't opened until now. Someone stares at a photo and tries to imagine a life where the biggest problem is whether the bus is late. You are tired in layers. Physical fatigue, emotional fatigue, the kind of fatigue that sits behind your eyes and makes your face feel older than your years. But you also feel that weird, temporary invincibility that sometimes follows survival, not arrogance. Just a dazed sense that you were tested by immense forces and still got to walk on grass afterward. The day does not end with a dramatic speech. It ends with logistics, reports, maintenance notes, the schedule for tomorrow's possible briefing. You do not say tomorrow out loud with too much enthusiasm. You lie down later with your uniform loosened, your boots finally off, your body learning what stillness feels like on Earth. The sounds of the base settle into nighttime patterns. Someone laughs down the hall. Someone coughs. Somewhere outside, engines are being tested or repaired, the war always housekeeping itself. You stare at the ceiling and feel the mission replay in fragments. The takeoff wait, the high-altitude freeze, the flak, the fighters, the bomb run, the engine failure, the lonely return. You touch the lucky coin one more time, not as a spell, but as a reminder that you are still you, not just a slot in a formation. And in the quiet aftershock of returning, you realize the mission continues even on the ground. It continues in the empty chairs, the rumors, the maintenance crews patching new holes, and the way your mind tries to build a bridge from today's fear to tonight's sleep. You wake up the next day with the strange sensation that your body is still at 25,000 feet, even though your feet are very much on damp English ground. The cold has left your bones, but the memory of it still lives in your knuckles. You stretch and realize your shoulders are sore from holding tension for hours, like you spent the whole mission carrying a suitcase labeled, "Please don't fall apart." This is the space between storms. The war doesn't pause for sentiment, but it does have rhythms. After a mission like yesterday's, the base shifts into repair and replace mode. Ground crews crawl over returning aircraft, turning your ragged hull and feathered engine into a work order, then into a promise that the fortress will be ready to argue with gravity again. You see men in coveralls with grease on their cheeks and the same quiet focus you saw at pre-flight, as if fixing bullet holes is just another kind of morning routine. You drift through the day with your crew, each of you pretending you're fine, while quietly checking whether the others are fine too. The pilot goes to operations. The navigator checks the next day's weatherboard, even though nobody asked him to. The bombardier cleans and resets gear like repetition is a form of prayer. The gunners find a way to look relaxed without actually relaxing. A mainstream historical fact sits in the background of your downtime, like a clock you can hear even in silence. Your tour is counted in missions. The number shifts over the course of the war, but the idea is the same. You are working your way toward completion, one hardest day of your life at a time. The math of survival becomes a private calendar. You count the missions you've flown, and try not to look too far at the missions you still owe. That counting changes everything. You start noticing how men behave around milestone numbers. The guy who just hit his halfway mark walks a little lighter for a day before reality catches him again. The guy on his last few missions becomes absurdly careful with everything, like a man carrying a priceless vase across a crowded room. You understand that feeling. You can't rush luck. You can only refuse to give it unnecessary excuses. The base offers distractions with the earnestness of someone trying to keep a kettle from boiling over. There's a mess hall meal that tastes like optimism cooked by bureaucracy. There's a movie night where you squint at Hollywood heroics and quietly marvel at how clean everyone's uniforms are. There's a dance where English civilians and airmen try to pretend the world isn't on fire. Swing music becomes a temporary shelter, a rhythm that says your body is still allowed to be young. Joke one slips out when someone says the band is good enough that even the flak back in Germany would probably stop to listen. The laugh is easy and needed. Letters arrive. They are small, flimsy miracles. You watch men open envelopes with hands that shook under flak, but now tremble for a different reason. A sentence from home can steady you more than an engine overhaul. You write back with a careful balance of honesty and kindness. You say the weather is cold. You say your crew is good. You say you're eating enough. You don't mention the burnt popcorn sky, or the way your bomber briefly became an innovative ventilation system. Somewhere on the base, a chaplain offers quiet words that don't solve the war but sometimes soften the edges of it. In another corner, the flight surgeon checks on frostbite, fatigue, and the kind of stress that doesn't show up on a bandage. You find yourself grateful for any adult in the room who will say, in a professional tone, that fear is normal. A quirky tidbit makes the rounds during this lull. Someone introduces you to the short snorter tradition, where airmen sign banknotes or small bills and carry them as souvenirs of camaraderie. The idea is simple and slightly ridiculous. If you're challenged and can't produce your signed bill, you owe a round of drinks. It's an old kind of humor, a tiny ritual that turns money into memory. You add your name to a note with 2 other crew members, and the act feels like pinning a small flag into the ground of your shared survival. Joke 2 follows naturally. Someone says this is the only war where your financial planning includes, "Please don't lose your signed cash, or you'll have to buy beer with victory bonds." Not all downtime is soft. Sometimes it's filled with the aftershocks of loss. A crew that didn't return yesterday has a bunk that becomes a quiet landmark you step around without looking too directly. Someone is missing, which is the most emotionally dangerous word in the language. It can mean captured. It can mean rescued. It can mean the world is still deciding how cruel it wants to be. You hear rumors because rumors are the base's unofficial weather system. Someone says a crew ditched in the channel and survived. Someone says another was seen descending in chutes. You learn to treat every rumor like a fragile egg. Hold it carefully. Don't bet your entire heart on it. In the mess hall, the conversation shifts toward the larger why of all this. Not in grand speeches. In tired, practical questions asked between bites of food. Are we really knocking out the right targets? Does this shorten the war? Does it save lives in the long run? Or are we just feeding men and machines into a grinder of doctrine and hope? Historians still argue whether the strategic bombing campaign's most decisive contributions came from specific target priorities like oil, transportation, and aircraft production, or from the cumulative pressure of many overlapping attacks that strained the German war economy in ways planners only partially understood at the time. You hear echoes of that debate in the way your crew talks, even if nobody uses academic language. You're living inside the argument. And then comes the moral weight that arrives quietly, not as an accusation but as a shadow. You saw the target area. You know bombs don't land in tidy philosophical categories. You also know your friends are out there fighting on the ground, and the idea of shortening that suffering is not abstract to you. The war is a knot of cruel choices wrapped in good intentions. Your pilot has his own way of handling it. He focuses on the next checklist. Your bombardier focuses on accuracy. Your navigator focuses on routes that reduce exposure time. The gunners focus on protecting the crew. Each of you chooses a portion of the problem that fits inside human endurance. Joke 3 breaks the heaviness in a small, durable way. Someone says the real enemy of morale isn't the Luftwaffe, it's the base barber, who seems personally committed to proving that aviation helmets are the only reason anyone looks decent. The laughter comes easier than you expect. You also notice how the aircraft themselves become emotional objects during downtime. Your fortress sits on the line with fresh patches and new paint, like a tiger wearing bandages it doesn't want to discuss. You walk past it and feel a surprising tenderness. This machine carried you through flak that could have ended your story. It brought you home on 3 engines. In a war of mass production, you still manage to love a specific set of rivets. As evening settles, you find small comforts. The smell of cigarettes in the cold air. A cheap cup of cocoa that tastes like someone tried to manufacture reassurance. A quiet card game where the stakes are laughter and temporary forgetfulness. You glance at your signed bill, your lucky coin, and realize that your pockets are starting to look like a museum of coping skills. The next day's schedule hovers in the background. The briefing board might light up again. The weather might cooperate. The war might ask you to climb back into the thin blue where oxygen hisses like a metronome. You don't say you're ready. You say you'll be there. Because that is what life between missions teaches you. Survival isn't only the dramatic minutes over the target. It's the quiet hours afterward, when you rebuild your courage with coffee that should not legally be called coffee. Music that pretends the world is kinder. Letters that anchor you to home. and the steady companionship of men who understand your silence without needing you to explain it. You breathe. You rest. You count. You reach the edge of your tour the way you reach the edge of a long winter, not with fireworks, but with a quiet recalibration of breath. The mission count on the board keeps shrinking. The numbers you once refused to look at now feel strangely manageable, as if the war is finally letting you see a doorway instead of only walls. You still wake before dawn. You still walk across wet grass. You still smell fuel that feels like a memory you can't wash out of your clothes. But something subtle has changed in your posture. You have lived through enough of the routine to recognize which fears are useful and which ones are just noisy. A mainstream historical fact that settles into your end-of-tour mindset is simple and heavy. In the European daylight bombing campaign, especially with units like the 8th Air Force, you're expected to complete a set number of combat missions before you can rotate out. The exact totals and policies shift over time, but the idea shapes everything on the base. You measure your life in sorties, not in weeks. So you begin to treat each remaining mission like a fragile object. You don't make reckless jokes about invincibility. You don't tempt fate with bravado. You become very good at being quietly careful. Your crew looks different too. The pilot speaks less and smiles more selectively. The navigator's charts are worn like old novels. The bombardier has the calm of someone who has learned how to live inside the narrow tunnel of a bomb run, without letting the tunnel swallow him. The gunners have that rare discipline of men who know exactly when to talk and when to save oxygen, warmth, and focus. You still see new crews arrive. Their faces are cleaner with hope. Their laughter is louder with ignorance. You want to tell them everything and also protect them from everything. Instead, you offer small, practical wisdom. Keep your oxygen checks sacred. Trust your engineer. Don't let your gloves get damp. Stay with the box. You say it casually, like you're recommending a good brand of socks. Joke 1 lands gently when a new guy asks what the worst part really is, and someone answers, the flak, the fighters, and the coffee, sometimes in that order. The laugh that follows is friendly, not cruel. You have the odd experience of seeing your own fortress as both a tool and a companion. It sits on the line with fresh patches and paint that never quite covers the old stories. You remember the day it brought you home on 3 engines. The day your waist gunner turned a hole into an innovative ventilation system. The day you held straight and level while the sky tried to shake you loose. Those memories are now stitched into your definition of trust. A quirky tidbit makes its way into your last stretch of days. You hear that some crews, near the end of a tour, quietly add a small, private mark inside the aircraft initials. A date, a tiny drawing, something that won't be seen by anyone who doesn't know where to look. It isn't official. It isn't even always allowed. But it's a human instinct to say, we were here, we did this, we left part of ourselves in the metal. You don't need to carve your name into anything. Your hands already know the shape of your station. Your ears already recognize your pilot's voice through intercom static. Your body already flinches at the memory of black puffs, blooming like burnt popcorn near the target. Joke 2 arrives when someone says the real sign of being a veteran is that you can fall asleep anywhere except near a pot of coffee, because your nervous system has developed professional standards. The wider argument of the war presses in during quiet evenings. You hear different opinions in the mess hall. Some men swear the campaign is the fastest way to break the enemy's ability to fight. Others question whether the early cost was too high before long-range escorts and refined target priorities started shifting the balance. Historians still argue whether the strategic bombing campaign's decisive impact came mainly from targeting oil and transportation later in the war, from the cumulative destruction of industrial capacity across many categories, or from the way sustained aerial pressure forced Germany into costly defensive choices. You listen to that debate in fragments and realize it will outlive all of you. You also sense the moral weight of it growing more complex as your tour ends. You are not naive about what bombs do. You are also not naive about what happens to ground troops when the enemy keeps producing fuel, tanks, aircraft, and ammunition. You hold both truths because you have to. Joke 3 slips in with the weary grace that only experience can deliver. Someone says that when the war ends, the first civilian invention you want is a bed that doesn't feel like it's parked at 25,000 feet. Then, quietly, your final mission arrives. It is not necessarily easier. The sky does not soften its rules because you're nearing your exit, but you notice yourself moving through the routine with that end of tour clarity. Oxygen on. Intercom checked. Gloves dry. You stay with the formation. You let the bombardier do his sacred arithmetic. You keep your fear on a leash just long enough to do your job. And when you land afterward, when the wheels thump the runway and the engines wind down into ticking metal, you feel relief that is smaller than you expected and deeper than you can explain. Because the real relief is not just that one mission ended. It is that the long hallway of them is finally opening to a door. You finish paperwork. You shake hands with ground crew. You accept a few awkward congratulations that sound like men trying to say something enormous with only everyday words. You pack your gear with motions that feel almost unreal. You might be headed home. You might be reassigned. You might carry this war into another job. But the shape of the B-17 life is now part of your muscle memory. Your lucky coin, the one you touched on the frozen dawn of Section 1, is still there. It hasn't changed the physics of flak or the logic of fighters, but it has tracked your courage in small, private increments. You hold it once more and decide you don't need to believe in magic to appreciate a symbol. Now the pace begins to soften. You let the day stretch longer and quieter, like a blanket you can finally pull up without interruption. The air feels warmer even when it isn't. The noises of the base blur into a gentle hum, boots on gravel, distant engines testing, muted laughter from a room down the hall. Your mind releases the need to scan every horizon. You think of your crew as a constellation you will never map the same way again. The pilot's steady hands, the navigator's patient math, the bombardier's locked-in calm, the engineer's protective vigilance, the gunner's stubborn watch, the radio operator's thin thread to home. 10 men, 1 machine, 1 long argument with the sky. You imagine years from now, when the war is a set of photographs and sentences in a book, and you might find yourself explaining what it was like to be cold enough that thoughts felt brittle, to be afraid enough that jokes turned into oxygen, to be disciplined enough that you held steady when every instinct wanted to flee. The memory does not vanish. It simply quiets. It becomes less a storm and more a low tide sound in the background of your life. A reminder that you once flew through black bursts over Germany and came back to damp English grass. And tonight, as you let that memory soften into sleep, you allow yourself one simple, earned truth. You made it to the runway. You made it out of the sky. You made it home inside yourself.